invitation to release any fear and anxiety and to just leave it at the door today. So if you'll just gently close your eyes and just take a deep, relaxing breath, letting the chair support you. Allowing your feet to root you to Mother Earth. And I ask you to envision taking a walk with me. A walk down a beautiful path. It can be a prairie, it can be through beautiful trees. And on this path, we encounter a beautiful stream. A stream that reminds you of the blood flowing through your veins. And just be aware of the peace and the calm that it brings. Maybe asking yourself, where is it going? What will it become a part of? Taking a moment to just observe the flow of life. Now envision a bridge across that stream. A bridge that leads you into a beautiful forest. Allowing nature to surround you and knowing that if you have any questions about life, the nature around you holds all of the answers. And I invite you to just find a comfortable place, just to sit down, and just to allow the flow of life to move around you and through you as we enter into the silence. And now I invite you to stand while you're in nature and to allow yourself to walk out into a beautiful garden, letting the sunshine warm your skin, And you walk over to a pond and you look down into the pond and you see your image. And you become one with that image, becoming aware of who you truly are. And I invite you to begin your journey toward the beautiful light of the sun that you see in the sky, letting it guide you to divine love and divine light. Always remembering that as you journey through life, you'll have many guides and angels that are always there to help you. All you have to do is reach out and ask, and they will be there. All you have to do is to go inside, and the God presence will always be there. And as you bring your awareness back to this room, back to this time and this place, you allow that sun to radiate from your body, touching everyone and everything around you. Namaste. And now but the title of the chapter this week is Life in the Company of Strangers. And I see this and I think about the word stranger and automatically think about people I don't know. Or maybe people that I pass on the street or people that I've never seen before. Now, many of you probably know that, I think I've mentioned it before, that I'm a veteran and I was in the Air Force. So here I am, just kind of fresh out of high school, and I'm just dropped off by my parents to the bus station, where I take a bus back to the military entrance processing station, where they induct me into the military. I kind of swear in, and then I'm off to the airport, and then I am just dropped in boot camp with a group of 40 complete strangers. And I've got to spend the next 6 weeks with these guys in these dorm bunk type setup, showering together, eating together. I mean, you name it, you don't get any closer than that, let me tell you. But we were all complete strangers, but it didn't take probably more than a couple days, and we were all working together as if we had known each other for our entire lives. We shared tears of pain, tears of missing home and our families and friends, to tears of joy and laughter, just doing funny things like, you weren't supposed to have wet laundry in the dorms because if the drill sergeants came through and they found that, you were in trouble. So we would remove places in the ceiling and shove it up in there and hide it. Shoving candy wrappers, hiding it in your underwear. I mean, you learn to be really crafty together. But to me, it just showed by the time we were leaving boot camp, I mean, we were in tears because those 40 strangers had become some of the closest people I had ever known. And from as early as I can remember, I remember my parents telling me, don't talk to strangers. Well, that's pretty sound advice for a kid, right? Don't talk to strangers. But what about as adults? Should we continue to carry that bit of well-intentioned advice into adulthood and avoid talking to strangers? And that really poses an interesting question, doesn't it? Now, early on in the chapter, Mr. Palmer tells us about a time where he took a cab ride. And as he's sitting back in the back of the cab, he's thinking about how dangerous it could be. Because this cab driver never knows who's getting into the cab. And nowadays, that could be said probably for Uber or Lyft or any of those other types of public transportations. But he talks about how this specific cab driver kind of opened his eyes a little bit. Because a cab driver told him, he said, I'm not really worried about strangers getting into the car. Because most violent crimes are caused by people we know rather than by complete strangers. And he goes on to tell Mr. Palmer that he personally likes the stranger because it's by the stranger getting in his cab that he's able to make his living. He probably wouldn't make much of a living if it was just friends riding around with him all day. But Mr. Palmer, talking about the cab driver, stated, as he practiced hospitality toward the stranger, he grew more at home, embracing rather than fearing the tensions of diversity as a path of learning and living. Now, I'm not saying that we go out and we just ignore common sense when it comes to the stranger. We should always listen to our intuition. But this goes towards people we know too, right? What if don't talk to strangers isn't always the best case or best advice as we move through our adulthood? What if by not talking to strangers, we miss out on some great opportunities, some amazing opportunities? It could be for friendship. It could even be for a little bit of spiritual growth. What if coming to church on every Sunday, we saw people we'd never known before, never met before, and we're like, oh, that person's a stranger. I'm just not even going to talk to them. You might miss out on meeting some wonderful new people. Or what if you were that stranger that walked into church and everybody just kind of looks at you and averts their eyes, I'm not going to talk to the stranger. You'd likely never go back. Now, one of the things Mr. Palmer states in regards to strangers really caught my attention in a major way, and I think it warrants further discussion. While talking about his experience with the cab driver, he mentioned, many of us project on the stranger the darkness within us or beside us that we do not want to acknowledge. The darkness within us or beside us that we do not want to acknowledge. So what in the heck does that mean? Well, in ministerial school, part of our requirements was that we took 2 self-awareness classes. And nothing will really make you open your eyes and look at yourself in the mirror and think about the things that you're carrying around up here on a daily basis. And I learned that there's some pretty interesting stuff up here during those classes. There's some really great thoughts and questions and perceptions. But I also realize that there exists a direct correlation between here and here, my heart space, or here and here, the solar plexus, or really here and anywhere in the body when you think about it. And I learned to ask myself certain questions in that class. Questions such as, okay, when I'm around this person over here, I get this feeling right here. Why is it that I'm feeling this way when I'm around this person? What is it about this person that's making me feel this way? And then it forces me to stop and think not only why it is that they are making me uncomfortable, but what is it about me that's making me feel uncomfortable around this person? That's some pretty deep thinking, some pretty deep questions. Now, we also learned about something in our self-awareness class, and this is probably something that many of you psych majors are familiar with, but it's called the shadow, or the shadow self. Now, I can't remember which textbook in class we got this definition from. I found it in my school notes, so unfortunately I can't give it proper credit, but it defined the shadow as the side of your personality that contains all the parts of yourself that you don't want to admit to having. It is at first an unconscious side. It is only through effort to become self-aware that we recognize our shadow. Now, this may sound like a really negative aspect of ourselves, but it doesn't have to be. Because notice the definition states, at first, an unconscious side, meaning that we can become more conscious of it. And when we become conscious of it, we can learn to utilize it to gain insight and to activate personal power. It's also not trying to deny certain feelings that we have within ourselves or trying to live up to standards of the way others think we should be. It's instead accepting reality for what it really is. Things such as, you know what, I'm feeling anger right now. I wonder what that is or why that is. Rather than, I'm not feeling any anger at all and just ignoring it. It's acknowledging it and asking why, or what it is about this person or this situation that's making me feel that way. And knowing that it's okay to feel it, but digging a little bit deeper into the acknowledgement and find out whatever it is that's making you feel that way in the first place. It's also important to remember that we are not those feelings. Saying I'm angry is never true because you are not anger. You may be feeling anger, but you are not anger or whatever other emotion you're feeling at that moment. So it's important to differentiate between saying I am, which isn't true, and I'm feeling. Now, I also have to note here that I'm not a psychologist, so any suggestions I give here today are more from a spiritual perspective and only for that. And for that, I'm going to refer back to our book. How is it that we can not only ask ourselves why it is that a certain person or group of people might be making us feel uncomfortable, but possibly also being able to address that in constructive ways? Quite possibly even aiding us along our path of this little thing we've been talking about over the past several weeks, spiritual growth. So one of the things Palmer mentions in our book is no strangers allowed. Makes me think about those clubhouses, when you were a kid. So it might say, no girls or no boys allowed, but anyway. But it is human nature to want to protect ourselves. And I've mentioned ego here before over the past few weeks, but I haven't always spun it in a very positive light. So I probably haven't been overly fair to it. Because the ego does have its good traits as well. It sees the need for us to protect ourselves, which isn't a negative thing always, right? Unless it goes to an extreme. Sometimes, however, it likes us to protect ourselves to the extent that we're living life from a fear-based perspective, becoming fearful of leaving our own little warm bubbles or cocoons. And part of that goes back to the whole thing from childhood, right? Don't talk to strangers. If we always fear the stranger, though, we're likely never really willing to ever allow the stranger in, resulting in us hanging our no stranger sign at the door. Now, Palmer states, strangers have legitimate access to our private lives only when we say, come in. And he gives the example of, he talks more about physically letting strangers in. For instance, you go to turn on your lights don't turn on, so you pick up the phone and you call an electrician. The electrician knocks on the door, and more than likely that electrician is going to be somebody you've never met before. Yet you need your lights to work, so you open the door and say, come on in. And you've just physically allowed a stranger into your home. But what if we take those types of instances of welcoming the stranger out of the equation? What about the person who views God differently than you do? What about the person who lives in a country that's much different than our own? The person with a different sexual orientation or gender presentation? The person with a skin color that's different than our own? So who in here likes pizza? You don't have to raise your hand. You can't go on. Y'all know I like to ask questions. Now, who in here is like me and orders the same flavor or type of pizza almost every single time? Yeah, that's what I thought, yeah. And I know more of you do too, you're just not admitting it. But you like pepperoni, so you stick with pepperoni. But if you do that, how do you know you don't like pineapple or anchovies on your pizza? You don't, because you're sticking with the same one every single time. I used to hear about people getting barbecue on their pizza. Yeah, barbecue sauce. And in Texas, even in a place where barbecue is abundant, that just sounded very sacrilegious to me. I would think about how terrible it sounded and how I was like, there is no better way to ruin a good pizza. And then Mindy and I discovered this place, and I kept seeing it on the menu. So finally I was like, you know what, I'm going to try it. And it was great. It was awesome. I continued. That became my go-to pizza after that. Pineapple is really good too. I've never tried anchovies, but pineapple on pizza is actually very good too. But what about also with different types of people? You think we might realize just how much we're missing out on by not allowing different types of people into our lives, into our own little private cocoon? Now, Mr. Palmer states, a vital public life is key to democracy. The public realm is where we learn that despite our differences, we really are in this together. And you know how by now, if you've been coming to these talks, you know how I like to place the word spiritual in front of democracy. So let's change it a little bit. A vital public life is key to spiritual democracy. The public realm is where we learn that despite our differences, we really are in this together. So we're not denying that we look different from each other. We're not denying that we have different skin colors or speak different languages or have different hair colors or different size noses. Maybe we're not saying that we believe in God differently, if even at all. We're not pretending that those things don't exist, but what we are doing is looking beyond those things. You've probably heard the saying by now, if you've been around spiritual groups for long, we are spiritual beings having a human experience. And you may hear that often because it's true. We may be living it in different ways through these human bodies, but the truth of the matter is that we are not these bodies. We are not our countries of origin. We are not the different languages that we speak. We are the spirit that resides within each one of these human bodies that we are living this life in. We're not political parties. We're not religions or anything else in the physical that you can imagine. We might align with these things, but we are not these things. And I don't believe that we're here to live in our own little bubble. We're here to have these human experiences and all that these experiences entail. And we can't do that if we live in fear. And this includes living in fear of the stranger. So how do we move past any possible fear of the stranger and instead begin to welcome them? Palmer mentions the public life. And he states, where our relations with each other have a chance to become more pleasant, more strong, and more durable. So in order to experience those relations, we have to sometimes make ourselves a bit vulnerable, don't we? Because A, it may not always be so comfortable, and B, we may be facing our shadow, forcing ourselves to ask the question of why. And that can be extremely frightening, but it can also result in some amazing changes in growth in our lives. So one of the things Palmer mentions is that fear of the stranger is reduced when we do this. So a few weeks ago, I'm at the grocery store. I'm at one of the pick and saves over here. And I notice a guy, and he's wearing a t-shirt. And on that t-shirt is a political figure that I don't support. I'm not giving names. It could be somebody from 20 years ago. But my guard immediately goes up, and I become a little fearful of this guy. I feel my blood pressure rise a bit, and I'm quick to judge myself, thinking, I need to avoid that guy. I'm not going to go anywhere near him. Yet I do what I always do. I'm pushing my cart out, and I've got about 10 bags, and instead of just taking the simple route and rolling the cart out to the car, I decide I'm going to grab all 10 bags and walk out with them. So I'm juggling bags on each arm, and before I know it, stuff falls onto the ground. I look up, and you know where this is going. The man with the t-shirt is standing right there. Yet he comes up, and he bends down, and he picks my stuff up, and he puts it into the bag. And we both smile, and we both make a joke about, especially guys, thinking you got to do all this at once. And we have a good chuckle, and just off we go. Now, this might be a mild example, but think about how differently we might feel about interacting with people who we may view as a stranger, especially those that may feel differently about certain things, may feel differently about things than we do. Sometimes we can begin to reduce that fear by not making rash judgments like I did with that guy. And it's very easy to do. Believe me, I do it far more often than I would care to do. Being a minister does not change that. But it's when we're willing to ask ourselves why. For me, later on when I thought about it and I asked myself why, I realized that his shirt triggered issues and division that I'm currently experiencing in my own family. And that brought those things up for me. But the thing is, I don't know why he was wearing it. It wasn't really any of my concern. I don't know what he's currently experiencing in his own life and in his own situation. All I know is that in that moment, we were just two people sharing a laugh in the parking lot. My fear of the stranger was reduced in that moment. Another one Palmer mentions is that needs become evident and mutual aid becomes possible. So I remember a couple of years back when Mindy and I were still living in Texas, one of the hurricanes, and I don't remember which one it was, and I'm sure you saw it on the news, but it stalled out over Houston, Texas. And it was dropping just buckets of water on that city. The streets were like rivers. People's houses were flooding. Some people were even stranded on the roofs of their houses and they couldn't get away. Yet there were pictures and videos of citizens, not military, not National Guard, not police, but regular citizens getting their boats out and zipping through the water and going and helping these people get to safety. People weren't stopping to ask what your political affiliation was before they allowed you in the boat, or what country you were born in. And why was that? It's because it didn't matter. People needed to be guided to safety, and others were there to help. Maybe you aren't saving someone from drowning in a stalled hurricane, but you may be touching a life in a way you never imagined. Sometimes it's just something as simple as making eye contact with another person, letting that person know that you see and you acknowledge them. Palmer also mentions that life is given color, texture, flair, drama, and humor when we welcome the stranger. Now, I don't know about all of you in here, but some of my best stories, in fact, most of my best stories include other people. And often they are even due to other people. And just think about it for a moment. Think about all of the warning signs you see everywhere. It's because somebody tried it. Don't use a hairdryer while you're in the bathtub. There's even this state park that's out in Far East Texas, and there's alligators out there because you're starting to get close to Louisiana. And they're just freely walking around. So I'm out there walking around one day, and sure enough, I come up to a sign, and it says, "Do not get too close to the alligators. They will bite." And I'm thinking to myself, somebody's done it. That's why they have a sign there. So unfortunately, those signs are posted by people that learn the hard way, but it's other people that give us the stories behind those things. But in all seriousness, people, often strangers, are what make life what it is. If you don't believe me, attend a festival or a concert or some other crowded public venue. You're likely going to witness things that give you great stories. And often people are what bring about some of those things that we enjoy in life the most. I mean, while we can certainly experience these things in our own little groups or families, it can become pretty dull after a while. It gets dull to hear Uncle Greg's joke about the chicken crossing the road. It's only funny for so long. We sometimes need to mix it up and meet new people that can tell us new jokes, right? It takes different people to also introduce us to different foods and different clothes and just different ways of experiencing the world. And we're likely not going to find that if we just stay in our own little bubbles. Think about all of the amazing things that we'll miss out on if we don't put ourselves out there to meet new people that can further enrich our lives. And just for a moment, envision a world where we're all the same. We all like the same foods. We all wear the same clothes. We all speak exactly the same language, live in the same kind of house. I mean, you get the gist. It lacks imagination. It lacks humor. And it lacks those laughter and tears and joys that make our life experience what it is. Imagine a world in which we live in such fear of the stranger that we don't offer assistance to each other. We see someone on a street in need of assistance and we allow fear to take over. We avert our eyes and we just walk by, leaving them to their own devices simply because that person is unfamiliar to us. And I've witnessed firsthand here at this church. When I was here for my audition weekend, I witnessed two people who saw a person in need. They moved beyond any fear, any preconceived notions, even though this guy spoke another language, and went out of their way to help this stranger and help get him to where he needed to be. Maybe even at the end of the day, we'll get to the point where we perhaps realize that there is not even any such thing as a stranger. Realizing instead that we are all a part of this same God source, God energy, whatever name you use for it. That same source and loving energy that stretches into every corner of this universe. That same source and energy of love, of this amazing divine love. Maybe we'll realize that it takes all of us to create the kind of world that we truly want to live in. Each and every one of us to do our part to make this world a better place. To make this human experience not just one that we're in right now in this moment, but one in which we can be proud of helping both ourselves and those generations that are to come. And we don't do that by fearing the stranger. We do that by allowing the stranger, by asking ourselves why when necessary, and by extending the invitation to come in. Namaste.